Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, welcome to the second session of the tutorial. I am Dr. Jishnu Bhattacharya, an associate professor in mechanical engineering from IIT Kanpur. So we have started these tutorial sessions. In the last tutorial session, we have looked at few problems, and in this tutorial session again, we'll pick up some different kinds of problem to elucidate the thermodynamics in the undergraduate level. So the book that you see in your screen, that is the book that we follow here at IIT Kanpur for undergraduate thermodynamics teaching, and the book is Thermodynamics for an Engineering Approach, and the book is written by the authors Sengel and Bowles. So we are following this particular book, and from the last time we have looked at few problems from chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1, we have covered the introductions and the basic concepts, which covered the different definitions, units and all, and then how to measure pressure, temperature, etc. Okay, we have solved few problems from chapter 1, and then we also solved few problems from chapter 2, couple of problems which talks about energy transfer and general analysis of energy, okay, which also talks about the first law of thermodynamics. Please follow the mouse that is moving here, because that's how I'll be pointing to the portion where you need to put your attention. Okay, so here we'll see the energy transfer through heat, energy transfer through work, what are the mechanical forms of energy, and then the energy conversion efficiencies. Okay, so that is the chapter, and here this is a tutorial session, so I will assume that the chapter you have covered, you have learned the concepts, and you have learned all the formulae to calculate different things, and here we are going to apply all those concepts. So today I'll be taking few problems again from chapter 2 itself, okay, because this is a very important chapter which just sets the foundation correctly for the later chapters. Okay, so let us first take the first problem today. Okay, so here the first problem here is a hollow spherical iron container we have with outside dia of 40 centimeters. So in the figure you can see that the outside dia is 40 centimeter and the thickness is 0.4 centimeter. Okay, that's shown here. And that particular iron container, and it's a spherical container, that means a ball, a hollow ball, is filled with ice water at 0 degree centigrade. You can see there are some ice blocks and there will be some water as well. It's filled with that ice water mixture and it is at 0 degree centigrade. Now if the outer surface temperature you can measure, which is measured to be 3 degrees centigrade. Okay, so if this is the case, then you have to find the following. The first one that you have to find is the approximate rate of heat transfer. So you can see the outside is at higher temperature, the inside is at lower temperature, so there will be some heat gain, right? And that is what you have to find out, what is the rate of heat transfer. Okay, why it says approximate, we will talk about very soon. The next part you have to find out is the rate of ice melting. So whenever the heat is gained, you will actually have the ice inside the container to be melted, right? And the question wants to know what would be the rate of that melting. Okay, so let me zoom this out a little bit so that we can see things more clearly. Okay, so that on your left hand side we have this problem statement. Now let us try to see what we will need to solve this problem. So first of all, this is asking for the rate of heat transfer. So you have to have some preliminary concept of conduction heat transfer. Okay, conduction heat transfer means the heat transfer mode through solids. So this iron container is the one that is carrying heat in this particular example, and that is why the conduction will be the heat transfer mode. You may or may not have been introduced to this concept of conduction. I am not assuming, but the basic school level heat transfer, the phenomenological equation that you are familiar with, the law of cooling or very basic conduction concept. Okay, that's all you will need here. So now I come back to the question where it asks the approximate rate of heat transfer. Okay, why it asks for approximate? Because with the given information it will be difficult to find out the exact rate of heat transfer. So that is why the question itself is not expecting you to give a accurate answer. So that is why it is saying just give us the approximate rate. Okay, so here if you look at this figure closely, so the inside dia will be less than the outside dia for the sphere, right? And the diameter will be changing as you go from the inside to the outside dia, right? So as the dia is changing, the heat transfer area or the area perpendicular to the direction of heat transfer will also be changing. So when you learn the conduction in more detail, you will see that change of area along the direction of change of area perpendicular to the direction of heat transfer causes lot of issues, and you have to, for an accurate analysis, you have to consider the spherical coordinate system differential equation. It may be partial differential equation, or in this case it will be an ordinary differential equation. But what is important there, that all those equations and boundary condition you will need to actually solve this problem accurately. But here we are after a very approximate analysis. So what we are doing, we are going to consider the area to be constant or not variable. So the area in the normal direction of heat transfer is actually variable, but for small thickness, here the thickness is small. You can see the outside dia is 40 centimeter and the thickness is 0.4 centimeter. So it's very small compared to the dia. So that is why we can assume the thickness to be, or the area to be, constant. Okay, so this area we are going to use for heat transfer, and this heat transfer, this Q dot, that means the rate of heat transfer, that you know from your high school knowledge, that it will be the conductivity K multiplied by the area perpendicular to the direction of heat transfer. Let's say we designate it with A, and that will be multiplied by the temperature difference, delta capital T, that's the temperature difference, divided by small t. This small t is not time but the thickness of the spherical ball. Okay, so this is the phenomenological equation of heat transfer or rate of heat transfer, and everything is known here, everything is given. It is given that it's iron container, so you know what would be the value of the conductivity K, and this area is nothing but the area of the sphere, and that is pi into d square. And this temperature differences is also given in terms of the inner and outer temperature. So what is happening, heat is coming from outside and the outside wall is given to be 3 degrees centigrade, while the inside of is maintained due to ice water, it's at 0 degrees centigrade. So both T out and T in are given 3 degrees centigrade and 0 degrees centigrade. And also in the denominator we have thickness, that is also given to be 0.4 centimeter. Okay, so in the next step we are just inputting all the values. So for this iron you have to look up table for the conductivity of iron, and then pi d square is given. Okay, so we have converted all the centimeters into meters because we have to be consistent for the SI system. So 40 centimeter turns out to be 0.4 meter. So this pi d square is 0.4 meter whole square. Okay, and this T out and T in are 3 degrees centigrade and 0 degrees centigrade. Thickness also we have converted into meter from centimeter, so that is 0.4 centimeter means 0.004 meter. Okay, so all here again I bring your attention to the unit system. As in the last tutorial also I emphasized that always write with all individual units in the same unit system. Okay, so here all the units are written in SI system, and this degree centigrade is equivalent to the Kelvin. Okay, so that does not change the dimension of the system. So basically what we get is a consistent SI unit system equation written. So the after calculation you will get in terms of SI unit only. Okay, so the rate of heat transfer here is 30.235 watt. Okay, and we are assuming it's a steady state heat transfer problem. Okay, because we are not assuming that this 3 degrees centigrade is getting changed with time. So everything is staying the same, and under this condition the heat transfer rate will be 30.235 watt. Okay, now the next part of the question, it asked us what is the rate of ice melting. So now we know how much heat per unit time the ice water mixture is gaining. Now that heat will actually convert ice into water, right? So we need to know what is the heat required for unit amount ice to melt at the same temperature, and that is called heat of fusion, right? So basically the rate of ice melting will be rate of heat gain divided by the heat of fusion. So rate of heat gain we have just found out, that is 30.235 watt, and again this heat of fusion you have to look up table, and you will see that this heat of fusion at normal pressure, here we are assuming atmospheric pressure, and there the heat of fusion for water is 333.7 kilojoule per kg. So for 1 kg of ice melting you will require this much kilojoule of heat. So ultimately that division will give you the rate of ice melting, which is 0.0906 kg per second. Okay, So here what we learn is that the basic concept of heat transfer, and that's one of the major form of uh, like energy transfer that we talk about in first law of thermodynamics, right? Heat and work. So how heat transfer happens, and this is a case we have taken where we have looked at the steady state approximate heat transfer equation, and we have solved what would be the rate of ice melting. Okay, so that gives you the first problem where we talked about only about the heat transfer. Okay, and let us take the next problem now, which will be a problem that will make you wonder how much insensitively we behave often. Okay, not all of us, but all of us sometimes we pay less attention to small things which we should as sensible citizen, as sensible engineer, and as a sensible person. Okay, so let's see what is the, like, let's talk about some moral implication of thermodynamics. Okay, we can say this problem will open that door. So what's the problem first? Let's talk about it. A university campus has 200 classrooms. You can just think of your college or your university where you are studying at the moment. So let's say that your campus has 200 classrooms and 400 faculty offices. Okay, the classrooms are equipped with 12 fluorescent tubes, each consuming 110 watt. Okay, so you have seen that all these classrooms are well lit. You need multiple of these fluorescent tubes, and you have 12 on average for each room, and each consuming 110 watt, including the electricity used by the ballasts. So ballasts, nowadays it's not much used, but earlier, to stabilize the voltage and current for the fluorescent tubes, we needed to use these ballasts, electrical ballasts. Okay, so you can just ignore that part of information. Basically, each tube is consuming 110 watt. Okay, now the faculty offices, sorry, the faculty offices on average have half as many tubes. Okay, so 6 each. Now the campus is open for 240 days a year. Okay, so not any campus is open for 365 days. The working days are 240 days a year. The classrooms and faculty offices are not occupied on average of 4 hours a day. Okay, so for the when the faculty, one particular faculty member is taking a class, or he's busy with somebody in discussion room or somewhere, so his own office is not occupied. On average, if we take the data for everybody, on average it's 4 hours a day. And classrooms, each classroom is not occupied all the time, so again they are not occupied 4 hours a day every classroom on average. Okay, but the lights are often kept on. Okay, you have seen this. Oh, suppose you are entering into the classroom uh, as the first person, you see that the class is well lit, and you'll be happy with that. Okay, but when nobody was there at that time, the lights were switched on. Okay, that you often see. And again, when you leave the classroom as with a friend, talking about something, and then you just don't notice that the classroom, the switches are kept on when you leave the classroom as the last person. Okay, so how much electricity and money, hard money, we are losing by that particular insensibility? That's the purpose of this problem. So if the unit cost of electricity is rupees 6 per kilowatt hour is the unit of electricity consumption. Okay, whenever we talk about in this month you have to pay for 60 units of electricity for your home. So that unit of electricity is kilowatt hour. That means if you run a pump of 1 kilowatt for 1 hour, the power that it will consume, and the value of that electricity is, suppose it's rupees 6. It's typically the average value at this moment throughout India. Okay, now determine how much money is saved per year if the lights are turned off during unoccupied hours. So nobody is getting affected. You are just turning off the lights when nobody is occupying that room. That's fair enough, right? So let's see in terms of calculation. So this is a simple high school problem, just simple arithmetic, summation and multiplication. But to increase the awareness, which I always tell you, my students, that if you are an engineer or if you are an educated man or woman, you have to behave like that, right? So you are expected to guide the lay person in the society, and you have to behave as a sensible person, okay, and sensitive person. So both as sensitive citizen and as a student of thermodynamics, because now you should have some idea of these numbers, okay, and how much it cost in terms of money and energy. So let's say that the amount of energy for the lights in the classrooms, that are, you just get it by multiplying the number of classrooms, which is 200, lights per classroom, which is 12, and the rate of consumption, which is 110 watts. So if you multiply that, you will get 264 kilowatt. Okay, so this is the, when all the classrooms are the lights are on, you are consuming 264 kilowatt. Okay, per second you are consuming 1000 joules. Okay, now similarly the consumption of electricity for lights in the office is the similar way, you can find that's also 264 kilowatt. Okay, so the total consumption for the lights is just summation of these two, 264 kilowatts, which is 528 kilowatts. Okay, now it is given that every working day rather, the average unoccupied hour is 4. So, and you have 240 days a year as working day. So basically for the working hours or the unoccupied hours during the working days is 960 hours. So you can save this amount of energy, 528 kilowatt, for 960 hours. Okay, so the total energy saving will be multiplication of 960 hour and 528 kilowatt. Okay, so that total number comes out to be 506.88 megawatt hour. Okay, so kilowatt hour, you get a very big number, that's why we have converted it into megawatt hour. So this much energy you are saving by not hurting anything. You are just practicing switching off your lights and fans when you leave any room, in your house, in your university, in your office, wherever. This is simple practice can save you this much amount of energy. And in terms of cost or money, how much is that? We have taken that 6 rupees per unit is the cost. So this much in money, that's 30 lakhs 41,280. So just imagine the scale of money per year we are wasting in terms of this casual attitude towards this energy saving. Okay, so I mean, this 30 lakh, if you can save your university, your tuition fee will come down effectively, right? So it's, you have a selfish motive as well, and you will have a healthier air to breathe in, because the amount of energy that you are going to save, that will cause that much less amount of coal that will be burnt in some thermal power station. So your air will be that much more easier to breathe, right? So please consider this problem when you next time get out of a room which will be unoccupied for several hours, and please remember to switch off the light. Okay, thank you, and let's go to the next problem. Okay, so here what we are going to talk about is again conversion of energy. So first two problems in this tutorial we have looked at, I mean, a single form of energy, electrical energy is getting used or some heat energy is getting transferred to a system. So here we will see the different forms of energy will get converted between each other. Okay, so what's the problem statement? An oil lamp is drawing 44 kilowatt of electric power while pumping oil of density 860 kg per meter cube. Some oil is getting pumped, okay, at a rate of 0.1 meter cube per second. So this unit itself is telling you that this is the volume flow rate, right? 0.1 meter cube per second, not meter per second, which is the velocity unit. Okay, the inlet and outlet diameters of the pipe are 8 centimeter and 12 centimeter respectively. So pump will have an inlet and an outlet. Okay, for these two these two pipes, the dimensions are different. Okay, inlet is 8 centimeter and the outlet is 12 centimeter diameter. Okay, if the pressure rise of the oil in the pump is measured to be 500 kilopascal. Okay, so the pressure rise is given. The objective of using a pump is to raise the pressure, right? So that is the that's the given quantity here. The pressure rise is 500 kilopascal, and the pump is run by a motor, electric motor. Okay, if you have seen a pump which gets the water from the oil and it raises it to some tank upstairs, there also you have seen the pump is fitted with a motor. Okay, so here also in the figure you can see a electric motor is actually driving the pump, and the efficiency of that motor is given to be 90%. Okay, so amount of electric power it gets, it will transfer only with some loss. Okay, and that loss is 10%. Now you are to determine the pump efficiency. So the whole problem is summarized in this figure. You can see you have a motor which takes 44 kilowatt of electric power from outside, and it has an electrical efficiency of 90%. Now it drives a shaft which actually drives the pump, and the pump raises the pressure by 500 kilopascal. And what is the inlet condition of pump at this state? At state 1, the diameter is 8 centimeter and the rate of flow, volume flow rate of oil is 0.1 meter cube per second. And what is the outlet condition? The diameter is 12 centimeter. And you can see that for continuity, you have to have the same volume flow rate through the outlet as well. Okay, for the steady state operation. Okay, so here everything is given. You have to find what is the efficiency of this pump. Okay, so how much energy it is getting and how much energy it actually transferring to the oil stream. Okay, so that is the So the thing that you have to find out, and these oil stream energies are mechanical energies. Okay, so first let's look at the solution. This is a problem on energy conservation. Okay, and heat interaction is negligible here. Okay, all the interactions we are having is electrical power coming in, and you have mechanical energy change. So the total change in mechanical energy of the oil flow, that is the effective energy supplied by the pump, right? That's the energy conservation we are talking about. And this effective energy supplied by the pump we need to find out the efficiency of the pump, right? So what is the what is the mechanical energy of the oil stream? It is the summation of the potential energy GH term plus, and this is per unit mass. So no density or mass flow rate is appearing. We are just considering for unit mass flow rate what is the mechanical energy content of the flow. So that's the first term GH, and then the pressure term, which is pressure into this small v. Small v stands for specific volume. So there will be few v's. Let's differentiate now that the small v is the specific volume. Okay, and this v, capital V, with these two small horns will designate by this the velocity of the flow. Okay, and another v you will see here. Please follow the mouse. So this particular v dot with a bar inside, that is the volume flow rate. Okay, so volume, velocity, and specific volume, these three v's we are going to differentiate in this problem, otherwise there will be confusion. Okay, coming back to the energy, mechanical energy content of the flow. So the GH plus your P into specific volume, that's the pressure energy, plus your kinetic energy, that's the velocity squared by 2. Okay, per unit mass. So now for this particular problem, we are seeing that the elevation change made by the pump is not there, it's negligible. So this GH term we don't have to consider at all. Okay, so what we will take, the E dot mechanical will be P into specific pressure into specific volume plus velocity squared by 2. Okay, now the change in mechanical energy of the flow, that's what we are interested in. So this delta capital E mechanical dot, that means the small e mechanical, the difference of it, that means the outlet condition energy minus the inlet condition energy multiplied by the mass flow rate, that will give you the total mechanical energy change for the flow. Clear? So mass flow rate into this E, small e make out minus small e make in. Okay, now the mass flow rate is nothing but the density into the volume flow rate. Now we are given with the volume flow rate. Okay, here if you see, this oil is flowing at 0.1 meter cube per second. So that's the volume flow rate. Okay, and here for the outlet condition, we have pressure into specific volume at 0.2, which is the outlet state, plus velocity 2, that means outlet velocity squared by 2, minus the inlet condition, that means pressure and specific volume multiplied at inlet condition 1 minus the velocity 1 squared by 2. Okay, so we have just put the formula for this mechanical energy content of the flow. Now if you simplify and use the information that density is nothing but the reciprocal of the specific volume, right? So when you take this density inside the parenthesis, then you are left with the volume flow rate here, and the specific volume terms will vanish, and you will have a P2 minus P1 term, right? And for the kinetic energy part, the density will be there. So that will be rho into V2 squared minus V1 squared by 2. So here now we have gotten rid of the specific volume. We are left with two V's though. So first one with this bar inside, that is the volume flow rate, and inside this V2 and V1, these are the velocity of the flow in outlet and inlet. Okay. So here what are given in this expression? This volume flow rate is given. This delta P, which is P2 minus P1, that is also given. And this density rho, that is also given. Now we need to find these velocities V1 and V2, which are not given. So V1, how will we get it? We will get it from the given quantity, which is the volume flow rate. Volume flow rate is given, and the area in terms of the diameter of the pipe is given. So volume flow rate divided by A1, that is the velocity. So this pi d1 squared by 4 is the area. Okay, and we know what is the volume flow rate, 0.1 meter cube per second, and this pi. Now this centimeter we have converted into meter. Now it is 8 centimeter is equivalent to 0.08 meter, and that's squared. And if you calculate this, we will find the velocity in the inlet will be 19.9 meter per second. Okay. Now let's go to the next part, because now we need to find this V2, and then both this V1 and V2 has to be put in here. Delta P is given, so we'll get this delta E. Okay, so let's go to the next page where we are finding the velocity in the outlet condition. Okay, again V2 velocity at outlet condition will be same as this volume flow rate. Now we will have pi d2 squared by 4, and this d2 is nothing but 12 centimeter or 0.12 meter. Okay, so if you simplify, you will get velocity to be 8.84 meter per second. So now we'll put all the information that we have found to find this delta E mechanical. Okay, so again I am not going through, I have just put in the values here, and we will find that the effective pumping power, which is the same as the amount of mechanical energy change of the flow the pump is causing, that's 36.3 kilowatt. Okay, so that is the energy or effective energy the pump is inputting into the flow. That's the best way to put it. Okay, now what is the input to the pump? So we are after the efficiency of the pump, so we have to find what is the input and what is the output. Output we have already found, that's 36.3 kilowatt. Now input is coming through the motor, right? So input to the pump is nothing but the input to the motor into motor efficiency, because not whatever is input to the motor is getting transferred to the pump, so we have to multiply it with motor efficiency. So these are also given, and you have 39.6 kilowatt. Now efficiency of the pump we can now see to be this effective power delivery to the fluid flow divided by the input power to the pump. So this 36.3 kilowatt divided by 39.6 kilowatt. So the efficiency of the pump will be 91.8%. Okay, so clear? We are after, so let me go back and tell you that, okay, so we have got some electrical input here in the motor. After some losses, it is getting transferred to the shaft, and this pump is actually getting certain portion, and 91, almost 92% of that is actually increasing the pressure of this fluid flow, which is coming from inlet and going through outlet. Okay, so here the energy conservation is happening between, and you note that even when we are considering some efficiency, energy conservation concept is not lost. So this efficiency that's not 100%. That means some part is getting converted into heat and getting lost to the environment. Okay, so that energy conservation information is there in this efficiency terms. Okay, so that introduces us with these pumps and motor. Now let's take another problem here, which will discuss about the some other forms of energy conversion. Okay, so the next problem is the water in a large lake is to be used to generate electricity by installing a hydraulic turbine generator at a location where water depth is 50 meters. You can look at the right hand side figure here, which will give you the idea of the physical situation. So here we have a lake, and this is another lake where there is a difference of 50 meters. So the mass flow rate is 5000 kg per second. So if you have a tunnel and some duct connecting through the turbine, and that is the mass flow rate there is 5000 kg per second. If the electric power is generated 1862 kilowatt, okay, so the turbine is fitted to some generator, okay, and you are getting the hydroelectricity out of it, and that is 1862 kilowatt, and the generator efficiency is given to be 95%. You are asked to determine the overall efficiency of the turbine generator. Okay, turbine, just like motor and pump, turbine and generator are put together because turbine does the physical mechanical in conversion, and then the power is put to the shaft, which goes to the generator and generate the electric power. Okay, so this turbine generator you can think of is the opposite of the pump motor system that we have looked at, where the input is electrical power. Here the input is mechanical power and the output is electrical. The second thing you have to find out is mechanical efficiency of the turbine. Okay, so basically there are few efficiencies involved in the whole process. We have looked at this in the last problem as well, and here also we are going to look at that these efficiencies, how they are related. That's the basic idea that we are going to understand through this problem. The third thing is asked is shaft power supplied by the turbine to the generator. Okay, so this is the physical situation. We have two adjacent lakes with certain height difference, which is often the case of hydroelectric dams. When we put some barrier, often this is not natural barrier, this is man-made barrier, and we put water at a high level and allow it to go through a turbine which is kept at a low level, so that all this head, okay, mechanical head is available for the turbine, and with certain mass flow rate, when water flows through, it runs the turbine, and that mechanical energy is converted into another form of mechanical energy which runs the shaft, okay, through the turbine, and that shaft is actually running the generator for electrical conversion. So here the unit mass change, per unit mass change in mechanical energy is, let's say we designate it with delta small e mech. Okay, so this per unit mass change is, here it is only, that is the head, the potential energy change that's happening. Okay, so this GH. Okay, and we are assuming that the duct diameters are same, so the velocities will be same. No change in velocity at the inlet or outlet we will observe. Okay, and the pressure is also not considered, because the specific volume and pressure, they are not getting changed. Turbine is not changing the pressure, right? Only thing, the head that we have is lost. This potential energy head, which is done, which is calculated by GH. So this particular case, we are given the information H is 50 meter and the acceleration due to gravity G is 9.81 meter per second square. So by multiplying, you will get 491, and in terms of the energy, the unit is joule per kg. So per kg of flow, per kg of water flow through this turbine, the available mechanical energy is 491 joule. And you may wonder that these units are meter square per second square, right? This line will give you unit of meter square per second square. And why I am writing joule per kg? Because if you do it by yourself, you can use the definition of joule, how you get to that, and then you will find that this joule per kg is nothing but meter square per second square. Okay, so this is dimensionally consistent. Okay, so let's look at the rest of the problem. Okay, so here, so we now know per unit mass what is this delta small e mechanical, and we have to multiply it with the mass flow rate, which is again given 5000 kg per second, to obtain the rate of change of mechanical energy, which is delta of capital E dot. Okay, so this 5000 kg per second is multiplied by now 0.049, we have converted it to kilojoule, that's why it's 0.491 kilojoule per kg, and that gives us 2455 kilowatt. That's the mechanical energy available to the turbine. Now you can see the overall efficiency is given, it's not given in, we have to find it out, but how this overall efficiency will depend on. So it will depend on, both this turbine and generator will contribute to the overall efficiency of conversion. Okay, so the electrical output, that's W dot electrical output, that is given, that is 1862 kilowatt. And what is the available mechanical energy, that delta capital E dot, that is also we just got, it is 2455 kilowatt. So this is basically, the numerator is the effective electrical output and the denominator is the overall available mechanical energy. So the ratio gives us the overall efficiency, that's 0.76, and that's the first answer the question asks us to determine. Okay, now the next portion is how to find the efficiency for the turbine itself. So this turbine generator combination, that efficiency is nothing but the multiplication of turbine efficiency and generator efficiency, right? So individually, if you want to find the turbine efficiency, that will be the overall turbine generator efficiency, eta turbine generator, divided by eta of generator. Now this efficiency of generator is given, that is 0.95. So what we found is overall is 0.76 divided by 0.95. So the individual turbine efficiency is 0.8. Okay, and now it asks us to find what is the shaft power from turbine to generator. Okay, and that shaft power output is turbine efficiency multiplied by the overall available mechanical energy, that is 0.8 into 2455 kilowatt, that means 1964 kilowatt. That's the shaft power which is going from turbine to the generator. So here at the right bottom corner you can see that we are first, the mechanical energy that is available is 2455 kilowatt. Now, due to turbine efficiency, we can only harvest a part of it, which is 1964 kilowatt, which is going to the shaft. Okay, and then the generator loses a bit of it, and ultimately what you are getting is 1862 kilowatt as the effective electrical output. Okay, so here in this problem we have looked at the opposite problem of motor pump. Here we have looked at turbine generator where electrical energy is the output, and again how these different efficiencies are related, these we have learned. Okay, now let's take up another problem which talks about the energy conversion itself, but now not in terms of hydraulic head but in terms of the mechanical energy of a flow of wind. Okay, so the problem statement is, at a certain location wind is blowing steadily at 7 meters per second. Determine the mechanical energy of air per unit mass and the power generation potential of a wind turbine with 80-meter dia blades. So note this, 80-meter dia. So if you have seen these windmills, they are usually huge. Okay, they are as tall and as big. So you can get the idea of this largeness. This is 80-meter dia blades at that location. Also determine the actual electric power generation assuming an overall efficiency of 30%. So these windmills, they are less efficient compared to this turbine and all. Okay, so and it is also and you see that it's 30% only, and the efficiency of conversion is coming into play again. You are given that the density of air is 1.25 kg per meter cube. Okay, this is a simple problem again, but it talks about the energy conversion from the kinetic energy of wind to electrical output. So just like the previous problem, we have some flow of mechanical energy, and in this case it is kinetic energy, and per unit mass we have the mechanical energy of the flow is just V square divided by 2. That is the kinetic energy expression. And here we assume that the whole of the energy is available to be utilized by the wind turbine. Okay, so the available kinetic energy of wind is of course available to the wind turbine, but it converts a very small amount of it. Okay, so why that happens and all you will learn in fluid mechanics, and also we'll talk about at the end of the problem. But we'll see that the efficiency of conversion is low, which is already given to be 30%. Okay, so this delta E mechanical, now we know the V is 7 meter per second square. So 7 meter per second whole square divided by 2, and again we'll use the unit of joule per kg because we want energy per unit mass. That's what we want, and it is equivalent to meter square per second square. I do urge you that you please check whether this is, I'm saying this, earlier problem also I have said this, so please check whether I am correct or not. Okay, this is 24.5 joule per kg. Now if we want to get the what is the total available mechanical energy for this wind turbine, we have to multiply it with the mass flow rate. Okay, so capital E dot mechanical, delta of that is mass flow rate into delta of small e mechanical. Okay, so first we have to find out the mass flow rate. Okay, how to get that mass flow rate? Mass flow rate is nothing but the velocity, the area available into the density, right? So the density and velocity are given, and the area we have to find from the diameter given for the wind turbine blades, that is pi d square by 4. So density is 1.25 kg per meter cube, velocity is 7 meter per second, and then pi into d is given 80 meter, that big windmill, 80 meter squared divided by 4. And you see the mass flow rate is 43982 kg per second. So it's air. So you can think of the volume, the amount of air that's actually flowing if you have to have 43,982 kg per second. Okay, and that is why we need this big windmills. Okay, and okay, first finish the numerical part and then we will discuss. This delta of E mechanical is equal to mass flow rate into small delta of small E mechanical, that is mass flow rate we just found out, 43982 kg per second. It is multiplied by 24.5 joule per kg, which we have found out in the last page, and that multiplication gives us 1078 kilowatt. Okay, so this is the delta of capital E dot mechanical. That means the available mechanical energy for the wind turbine to be harvested. We have not harvested yet. Okay, so this is the available mechanical energy, 1078 kilowatt or 1.078 megawatt. Okay, so here I bring your attention to the size. These are huge windmills, and you might have noticed this array of such windmills in the coastal or hilly regions, where usually the wind speeds are high, as well as you have enough vacant land space, uninhabited space, so that you can put up these windmills. Okay, they are huge, but they are very effective in terms of getting electricity from renewable sources. Wind is free, and we are just getting energy out of that wind speed. Okay, but why do you need these big windmills? Because the efficiencies are usually poor. Here it's given 30%. Okay, and in the last problem you have seen for the turbine, and then earlier to that you have seen for the pump. So whatever system you take for steam turbine, gas turbine, or even hydraulic turbines, they have efficiencies in excess of 80%. Okay, but wind turbines are less efficient because you have very small area of intersection that you learn in fluid mechanics. I am not going to discuss those issues here, why the efficiency is so low, but you just note that wind turbines are poor in efficiencies. So ultimately the electrical power output that you will get will be the efficiency of the wind turbine multiplied by the mechanical energy available. That means 30% of this 1078 kilowatt, which is 323 kilowatt. Okay, so by installing this 80 meter diameter huge windmill, you will get 323 kilowatt of electrical power. Okay, so this problem again talked about power conversion and basically the conservation of energy, the first law of thermodynamics. That was the base of this particular chapter, chapter 2. So in this tutorial, the chapter 2 has now been covered completely, and we have looked at several forms of energy, how they are converted, and how the first law is maintained or is followed. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.